Hi folks, this is Double Wins. Today I'd like to talk about US-China relationships throughout times. Well, it all began in the late 19th century. At the time, US was only a secondary power. They just followed the European powers, France, Britain, Germany. I guess at the time, what they wanted from China was trade, basically, because in those days China was a closed country, wasn't open to anyone. Britain won 2 wars against China. The treaty that China signed with Britain promised opening up trade posts along coastal cities and later on in the interior of China as well. US basically just demanded the same treatment from China, basically the rights to trade. So it was mostly a peaceful relationship until the Box Rebellion. Well, the blame was, in my opinion, on the Chinese side. I think most historians will agree with me because China, in its supreme stupidity, it decided to attack all the embassies in Beijing. The order was issued by the Empress Dowager. So as a result, 8 countries, including US, assembled the army to invade China to rescue their embassy personnel. It wasn't a big army. I think probably 30,000 people around. And the Chinese military was so feeble, they were easily defeated. And the emperor and the Empress Dowager had to flee the capital city. And surrender. So a treaty was signed, and usually in those days, when a country lost a war and surrendered, they usually had to cede some land to be colonized, plus a hefty fine for the military expenditure by the invading forces. But this time, because of the Americans' persuasion, there were no land ceded from China. They only have to pay the fines for the invasion. I really commend the US on this matter, not only because of their involvement in stopping other countries from demanding land grab from China, but also that they refunded most of the money that China paid to the US and used this money to set up hospitals and universities to help the Chinese to advance more quickly, to be integrated into the modern world. One of the most famous university in China, the Tsinghua University, was established with this fund. After the First World War, China was a victorious country. Most people don't know about this. China participated in the First World War on the British and American side. Japan was on the same side. Germany was, of course, defeated, and and had to give up their colonized land in China. And Japan saw a chance to seize this land, and so demanded possession of it in the Paris Treaty signing, of course China wouldn't want to lose land to Japan, because China was a victor as well. It didn't seem to make sense that a victor should cede land. So America on this matter was on the Chinese side as well. Americans never liked the land grabbing, like I mentioned during the Box Rebellion episode. So initially American was trying to deter the Japanese from grabbing the land that was left over by the Germans. However, a secret treaty was discovered, or was exposed by Japan, that was signed prior to the end of the war, that the government of China had an agreement with Japan to cede some rights of the Shantung province, which is the land I mentioned before that used to be colonized by Germans. The Chinese government had a secret treaty to cede some rights to Japan in exchange for a huge loan. And because of that, U.S. was not able to intervene anymore, because it was a treaty by you two, and if China has agreed to cede the rights to Japan, then there's nothing I could do. But even then, U.S. helped China in future treaties to stop Japan from actually taking over the Shantung province. So again, U.S. helped China greatly in this matter. It was President Wilson at the time, I think. Well, fast forward to the Sino-Japanese War, which happened just before the Second World War, and of course it ended with the Second World War. At first, U.S. was a neutral country. A lot of Chinese blamed the U.S. for staying neutral and selling weapons to Japanese, which was of course not justified, because as a neutral country, U.S. could do business with whatever country it wanted. It sold weapons to Japan, it sold weapons to China. Whoever willing to pay for the weapons, U.S. will sell them. As the war progressed, the U.S. started to become more and more dissatisfied with Japan, partly because of the atrocities committed by the Japanese troops in China, partly because Japan's expansion in Southeast Asia, which infringed on the U.S. interest as well. So U.S. started embargo on Japan. So no crude oil or rubber, all these essential materials, steel, could be exported to Japan. And Japan, being an island country, it relied heavily on importing these materials to sustain its war effort. So basically, once the embargo took place, Japan had probably only a year of supplies left to continue the war against China. So in a desperate effort to break open the embargo, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Of course, it was a suicidal mission in the end. But I would like for the Chinese to remember that the Americans sacrificed thousands of lives in Pearl Harbor to give moral support to the Chinese during the Sino-Japanese War. Nowadays, the Chinese communists don't want to mention that part of the history, that the U.S. made a big sacrifice for China. As the Second World War was ending, the future looked bright for China, but unfortunately, President Roosevelt died, and Truman came to power. Now, I think Truman was the worst president of the 20th century. First, let's look at what atrocity he committed. He dropped 2 nuclear bombs in Japan, caused hundreds of thousands of people died, and millions of people being poisoned. That was a genocidal action in today's standard. But that's another matter. Let's look at what he did to China. Now, FDR supported the nationalist government of Chiang Kai-shek, who eventually lost the Civil War and fled to Taiwan and transferred Taiwan into a democracy today. Of course, it's with him and his son and then his son's successor. But eventually Taiwan became a democracy. But Truman disliked Chiang Kai-shek. I think probably because of Truman's farm boy or background, he actually sympathized with the communists. He withdrew support for the Chinese government and intervened during the Chinese Civil War when the communists were on the verge of collapse. Now the Soviets supported the Chinese communists all the way. So towards the later part of the Chinese Civil War, Chiang Kai-shek government side is getting weaker because the US withdrew its support. But the communists were getting stronger because of the Soviet support. And as a result, communists took over the country. And China has been under dictatorship ever since. This was looking at a history, in a kind-hearted way. But if you're a conspiracy theorist, one would think, did Truman do that on purpose? He did not want China to become a prosperous, democratic country. He purposefully put the Chinese under communist control to put China down. Sometimes I think about that, and it makes me cringe if Truman did that on purpose. At any rate, payback's a bitch. Soon the Korean War erupted, and the US lost tens of thousands of men. And afterwards the Vietnam War happened, and I don't know how many men died in that war. In both wars, China was the force behind it. So had China did not turn red, US would have avoided these 2 losses. Truman not only caused hundreds of thousands of Japanese to die a horrible death, he also directly caused tens of thousands of US men to die unnecessarily. So when I look at the census of surveying all the public opinions about the US presidents, I was shocked to see that Truman a lot of times listed among the 10 best presidents in US history. I don't know if the Americans are stupid or what to vote for Truman to be one of the best. Anyway, that's enough about Truman. After that, there wasn't much US-China interaction because China was going through class warfare and Great Famine and Cultural Revolution, blah blah. Tens of millions of Chinese died in the process. It wasn't until Nixon, who went to China because they see China as a valuable ally in the fight against the Soviet at the time. And China happened to be in bad terms with the Soviet as well, so China willingly joined the US to fight the Soviets. And in order to prove its sincerity, China invaded Vietnam, a protectorate of Soviets, and gained Americans' trust. So ever since then, U.S. had this illusion that if China becomes economically prosperous, the middle class will cause the change or transition into a free democratic society. Boy, were they wrong. Chinese have this deep-rooted entitlement to power. Basically, my forefathers fought to ascend to the power of this country, and I have a birthright to continue to hold on to that power. So China basically never changed. Some might even say it's getting worse. The oppression on freedom and on personal rights and all the values that the rest of the world are embracing, China is just going backwards. The new leaders clamping down and tightening the grip on the people with its advanced technology. They pretty much can track everybody every second, and that's why I worry about the Western world using Chinese technology, because we don't know what kind of bug they put in it. If I buy a Huawei phone, they might have a little camera and secretly taping me all the time. Who would want that? And technology-wise, China is only good at one thing: stealing and reverse engineering. So throughout the past 20-30 years, the Chinese economy advanced greatly, and technological improvements were also very impressive. I suppose the CIA would know how much of that was stolen from other countries. And besides stealing, China also cheats. They practice unfair trade policies. They manipulate currency. The technique is simple enough, actually. They have a private company, a so-called private company, such as Huawei, and the government pumps huge amount of money into it, so they can sell their product dirt cheap and monopolize the world market. And in return, the Huawei company will gather intelligence for the government, and even spying and stealing technology. So it's a win-win situation between the Chinese government and the Huawei. The only loser will be the rest of the world. Well, this is going to bring us to the current trade dispute between China and the US. I would do another episode just on that topic. So let me know what you think.